everyone. So today we're actually going to talk about two musicals, Stephen Sondheim's Sunday in the Park with George, and Jonathan Larson, best known as the creator of Rent, Tick, Tick, Boom. We're going to talk about both of these because I think that they're very connected. Jonathan Larson was basically a huge fanboy of Stephen Sondheim, and Tick, Tick, Boom contains so many references to his musicals that it's kind of hard to talk about them without. And in addition, both of these are kind of semi-autobiographical pieces about the nature of the creative process and are seemingly very personal to their creators in a similar kind of way. So let's see how these compare. I'm the Broadway Neophyte, and this is Sunday and Tick, Tick, Boom.
More boats. More trees.
So Sunday is a fictionalized version of the life of French artist Georges Seurat, a pointillist painter, and his famous painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. The first act of the show deals with George trying to paint his masterpiece over a series of Sunday visits to the island. He deals with negative feedback from critics, creative struggle, and his deteriorating relationship with his lover Dot, who also serves as his model. I think Dot is a really interesting execution of a female character in a period piece, because this takes place in the 1880s, and so she isn't allowed to vote or have much legal autonomy from men at all. She's not super educated, she can't read, and she is pretty traditionally feminine. She dreams of joining the Follies dancers, but she still feels like a fully realized character whose actions drive the plot, despite not being a strong female character really in any of the traditional ways. She is actually trying to teach herself to read out of a grammar book. That's an ongoing thing, and the way it's pulled off in the show really makes this feel like an accomplishment, that she's trying to become more educated and independent. And she is a kind of smart, insightful woman in her own way. We hear a lot of her internal monologue.
George is very special. Maybe I'm just not special enough for him.
We know that she is insecure about her body, that she's insecure about her relationship with George, and eventually she has some very insightful thoughts on how her and George just have differing sources of fulfillment in life. He gets all of the fulfillment he needs from his art, while she needs attention from her partner, and he can't give her that.
You are complete, George, you all alone. I am unfinished, I am diminished. With or without you, we do not belong together.
So eventually, although obviously pregnant with George's child, she gets married to this baker named Louis, who can give her the attention she wants even though he's not the same genius artist type, and moves to America. And George sings this beautiful song, Finishing the Hat, about trying to finish painting this one guy's hat in the picture that he can't decide what color it should be, and he's obsessively, dedicated to it. And he reflects, using the hat, on how his devotion to his art has cost him his relationship with Dot, that even though he loves her, she can't be with a guy that focuses so much on finishing the hat to the cost of everything else in his life.
For you knows that however you live, there's a part of you always standing by, mapping out the sky. Finishing a hat, starting on a hat, finishing a hat. Look, I made a hat. Where there never was a hat.
Stephen Sondheim actually titled both of his autobiographies after this song, and it was also mentioned by Lin-Manuel Miranda in his Tony acceptance speech.
Mr. Sondheim, look, I made a hat where there never was a hat. It's a Latin hat at that.
So George finally finds the inspiration he needs in this talk with his elderly mother, who tells him about how beautiful the skyline used to be and how she can still picture it so clearly in her head.
Changing, I'll draw us now before we fade. Mother,
It keeps melting before our eyes.
watch while I revise the
Change.
And George has this image of the painting in his head, this perfect moment that will never be in real life. Most notably, Dot is still there, and he uses his wizard painter powers to move everything into the place where he needs it to be in his head and makes his beautiful work of art.
by the blue, purple, yellow, red water, on the green, purple.
purple, yellow, red grass. Let us pass through a perfect
And that's just Act 1. Act 2 is 100 years later when we meet George and Dot's great-grandson, who is also named George. George Jr. is a modern artist, but considering when this is made, modern means the 1980s. His medium of choice is the chromolume, this complicated light show that causes technical difficulties and impresses absolutely no one. He tries to connect with his heritage by making a chromolume show based on his great-grandfather's painting, bringing his grandmother Marie to help him introduce the piece.
George, look, all these lovely people in front of our painting.
Marie struggles to stick to her script, but has lots to say about her mother Dot's claim that George is Marie's real father, citing the notes in Dot's grammar book that mention George. George Jr. tries to get people invested in his chromolume, but it doesn't go so well.
exhibition. Art isn't easy. Every minor detail is a major decision. Have to keep things in scale. Have to hold to your vision. Every time I start to feel defensive, I remember lasers are expensive. What's a little cocktail conversation? If it's going to get you your foundation, lead to a prominent commission, an exhibition in addition. Art isn't easy.
Marie sings about how George Jr. would have gotten along with Dot.
You would have liked him. Mama, you would. Mama, he makes things. Mama, they're good. Just as you said from the start, children and art.
Sometime later, Marie dies. George Jr. goes to the island his great-grandfather painted, which has now been paved and put up a parking lot, and unsure of where his artistic career is going, reads from Dot's grammar book.
George looks within. George is adrift. George goes by guessing. George looks behind. He had a gift. When did it fade? You wanted people out strolling on Sunday. Sorry, Marie.
An apparition of Dot manifests and talks to George Jr. as if he were his great-grandfather, pushing him to keep creating things and commit to his choices, as she did when she decided to move to America.
I chose and my world was shaken. So what? The choice may have been mistaken. The choosing was not. You have to move on. Look at what you want, not at where you are, not at what you'll be.
He understands everything she says, even though she is a French ghost and he only speaks American, and resolves to keep creating his chromolume art even if others don't like it.
So careful. So excited.
Somewhat slow, but ultimately pretty enjoyable. The set design is great. It's such a good idea to have the set be the painting and have George move everything around in his mind to mimic his paintings and his earlier attempts at creating a great painting, and we get all these kind of fun fourth wall jokes about it.
Tree. The tree we always sit near. Someone has moved it.
No one has moved it, madame. It is right over there.
Besides that, the lead actors do a great job and really made me sympathize with both George and Dot. By the way, that is Inigo Montoya and The Witch from Into the Woods. The music is very patter-song-y because Sondheim is often like that, but the lyrics and the repetition of certain phrases and lines throughout the show is really impressive. Like there's this one song, Color and Light, where George sings about the colors and lights he wants to put in his painting and how inspirational they are and how beautiful. And at the same time, Dot is painting her face to prepare for her night out, and she sings about how she maybe wouldn't really want to be a Follies girl because there's too much color and light. She sings about it as a bad thing, and that kind of foreshadows how they don't really want the same things out of life.
Hey, color and light.
Now George looks. He could look
There's
forever.
only color and light.
Sees you when he doesn't all at once.
Purple and white.
What's he thinking when he looks like that?
only see, sometimes not even blinking.
There's so many little things like that, and like the music mimicking the pointillism, and it is just a really interesting score with a lot of things to discover. It's important to note that this show does actually take a lot of liberties with the life of the real George Seurat. Dot seems to be based on Seurat's model and lover, Madeleine Knobloch, whose relationship with him was a secret due to her working class status. She is depicted in this painting powdering her face, much like Dot does in the show, but unlike Dot, she lived with Seurat until he died. Also, neither of Seurat's children lived beyond infancy, sadly. But interestingly, in a letter to Sondheim, his friend and West Side Story collaborator Leonard Bernstein called Sunday by far the most personal statement I've heard from you thus far. He wrote the show after the financial and critical failure of Merrily We Roll Along in 1981. Sondheim had intended to quit musical theater, but his friend, director, and co-writer James Lapine convinced him to write another show after the two saw Seurat's painting at the Art Institute of Chicago. Lapine noticed that the artist had seemingly painted everyone and everything on the island except for himself, and the show evolved to explore an artist's isolation from the outside world. Sondheim's musicals were often criticized as being cold and lifeless, the same criticisms that are leveled at George's paintings in the show, and Sondheim even played Move On at the memorial for his friend and choreographer Michael Bennett. I do think it's kind of unrealistic that at no point does anyone ask George if he drew that or if it's anime, but in general, I think it's a really pretty, thoughtful show that's definitely worth checking out. Jonathan Larson definitely thought so, because he references Sondheim's work a lot in his mostly autobiographical musical Tick, Tick, Boom. Tick, Tick, Boom follows an aspiring musical theater composer named John, who is working at a diner to pay the bills while he tries to make a name for himself in New York City. Jonathan Larson is a lot more direct than Sondheim about basing a musical on his own creative struggles. John is about to turn 30 and trying to write music despite the ticking time bomb of his lack of achievement. By Raul Esparza, who incidentally also played George Seurat around this time, and is so tiny! Look at him, he's so little! The other main players are John's girlfriend Susan, a dancer, and his best friend Michael, an actor who has given up his art for a life as a successful businessman. Those are the only three actors. John is on stage pretty much constantly, while Susan and Michael play every other character. You can definitely see shades of Rent here. Impoverished New York artists, the option of abandoning your art in favor of a soul-sucking but lucrative job, a protagonist who narrates everything he does.
After a minute, Susan comes up from downstairs. She's wearing the dress we had made. A friend of mine who works with me at the diner designed it. Everyone we know wants to do something else.
Michael wants John to take a job interview at his firm, and Susan wants to move elsewhere and start a family. But John is holding out to see if his musical Superbia will get produced, allowing him to be rich without giving up his art.
I want to sit down right now at my piano and write a song. And people will listen to it and remember and do the same thing every morning for the rest of my life.
He wants his musical to impress his composer idol, a man he worships to the point that he won't speak his name aloud. And you can definitely see Sondheim's influence all over the show. John and Susan have this fight over the phone that has this very company sort of patter song vibe.
I feel bad that you feel bad about me feeling bad about you feeling bad about what I said about what you said.
It's I do and you don't and nobody said that, and who brought the subject up first? It's the little things, the little things, the little things, the little things. The little ways you cry together, lie together, that make perfect relationships.
And the first few lines of Come to Your Senses, the big show-stopping number in Universe in John's musical, are pretty reminiscent of Sondheim's Send in the Clowns.
You're on the air. I'm underground. Signals fading can't be found.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here I lost on the ground, you in midair.
At work, he sings a near-exact parody of Sunday from Sunday in the Park with George, complaining about how he doesn't have time to sit around and be inspired like an old-timey painter. He's part of the 90s MTV generation. He has to have a job, and the customers are terrible, and he's exhausted, but he really wants to believe that he can be an artist.
Sunday in the blue silver chromium diner. On the green, purple, yellow, red spoon. It's walk. Who should eat at home?
Frustrated with John's indecision, Susan gets a new job with the dance company and leaves him right before the workshop of his new show. At the workshop, Sondheim himself shows up to see it, and the big solo goes great, but no one wants to invest in the show.
What are you working at? Nothing. Well, honey, we always do the show with quirky for Broadway, and the cast awfully big for off, and the futuristic thing means sets are expensive. And musical theaters like Newark Airport, John, and you're snowed in at Buffalo, and now having plucked out your heart and eating it like a piece of ripe fruit, I'll leave you to sleep with a fragment of your shattered dream.
John confesses to Michael that he wants to give up songwriting.
Everyone else, you and Susan, have kept moving. I'm the only one still here, banging my head against the wall. My head hurts.
But Michael says that John needs to keep following his dreams, and that he only sold out and bought a fancy car and apartment because he has HIV, which was pretty much a death sentence in the 90s, and he wants to enjoy life while he can.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you earlier. I couldn't. Look, it's the middle of the day and I got a lot of work to do, so you close the door when you go, okay?
John runs around in a field being sad for a bit, and ends up in an empty theater playing an old piano, reminiscing about his older shows that he was in.
We sang, got a rocket in your pocket, and the jets are gonna have their day tonight, over and over and over till we got it right. When we emerged, wiped out by that flame, 9 o'clock stars and lit the way. What a way to spend the day.
Finally, he comes to terms with the truth that he wants to write music not for money or recognition, but because it's his favorite thing to do. On his 30th birthday, he receives presents from both Susan, who leaves on good terms with him, and Michael, who he promises to be with until the end.
The apartment is warm and noisy. And I realized I don't want to escape to the roof or fly to Cuba or go lock myself in the bathroom. I grab a beer and wade into the crowd.
He even gets an answering machine message from Sondheim praising his musical.
Rosa gave me your number. Sorry we couldn't talk after the show. I had to rush out. I just wanted to say it's terrific work, really. I'd love to get together and talk about it. Give me a call.
And the show ends as it begins, with beautiful harmonies between the three leads and a song about John's choice of his love of music over his fear of failure. Show has a lot in common with Jonathan Larson's other show, Rend, in that it's pretty flawed and slightly annoying, but with a lot of heart. Raul Esparza gives John this kind of neurotic, overthinking quality that's pretty charming, but the inside of his head does get a little claustrophobic at times, like when he gets the big sad monologue about how sad it is that Michael is dying. And as talented as all the actors are, there's only so many characters that they can pass for via quick costume changes. The fact that there's only 3 actors, as well as the kind of bare-bones set and the in-your-face symbolism of the tick-tick-boom, makes it come off a little SNL high school theater show at times. On the other hand, I think Tick Tick Boom is one of the best musicals at capturing what it's like to want to make something. When it hits its high notes, it's very sweet and very real. And speaking of high notes, almost all the songs are incredible, even the cut song Boho Days, which is nothing but Jonathan Larson singing over clapping. I sing that to myself all the time. And, 3090, the opening number, which has this kind of panicky, neurotic piano and these beautiful harmonies and counterpoint toward the end with all 3 of the cast, and John is singing about his fear of turning 30 in the 90s and how he doesn't know what he is going to do with his life or how he deals with not being young anymore. It might be one of my favorite songs in all of musical theater, and it's not the best, but it is my favorite. Which brings us to the end of Broadway Neophyte. Well, I've enjoyed making this show a lot, and I have discovered a lot of new musicals because of it, and rethought the way that I think of musicals and learned to pick them apart and see what works and what doesn't. And I've learned a lot about finishing projects and putting content out for people to see. But ultimately, I want to make something original. I do have a project that I'm working on right now, and it's in early stages, and I don't want to talk much about it yet, but it is something that I'm really excited about, and if I devote my spare time to making this sporadically produced YouTube series, I can't really do that. This has been a big learning experience in my life to make this show for a little over 3 years, maybe coming up on 4, and my followers have been like a very helpful to me, and my friends who watch my videos. I do read your comments, and they mean a lot to me to be a smaller channel, and I get to read this kind of stuff that someone laughed at one of my jokes or thought of the musical differently because of something I said, or maybe learned about a new musical that they haven't seen before. And I think that's something that all of us can do with our internet presence and our presence in the real meat space where we're made of meat. And so I'd like to thank, among others, Jillian, Johnny, Sarah, Ellis, Kyle, Kim, Marshall, and of course my family, who have been very quiet and patient with me filming, who are probably trying to sleep while I film this, and who have watched all my videos and been very supportive of this endeavor, and of my career in theater-related stuff in general. When I started this show, I didn't know what I wanted to major in. Now I am almost done with my bachelor's in theater and hoping to become a lighting or set designer, and I've worked on a lot of shows and become more confident in my identity as a theater person and my place in this field, and I think it's time for this Broadway Neophyte thing to come to a close so that I can go to the next step of making something, TM. And I want to thank all of you guys for supporting me in this stage. So thank you for that. Now and forever, I'm your Broadway Neophyte.